Chair calls Alicia Markum. All right, we show you registered as Alicia Markum on behalf of yourself, and you're testifying against the bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley and committee members. My name is Alicia Markum, and while I serve as an elected trustee on the Round Rock ISD School Board, I'm here today speaking in my private capacity as the mother of 2 boys who attend our neighborhood elementary school, and both of whom receive special education services. I am speaking against HB 4340. 10 years ago, my oldest son was diagnosed with autism. As a young mother learning to navigate the education system with my first child, I researched every educational option to ensure I would be giving him every opportunity at success. I spoke to every private and charter school in our area that promoted their campus as inclusive of students with disabilities. Here are some of the responses I received from those private schools. We have reviewed your child's IEP, and we do not have the staff in place to support him. We do take children with autism, but not children like your son. We want our students to have potential in something, and just for good measure from a local charter school. If you choose to send your son here and he has any behavior, we will teach him in a room by himself. Much has been said about vouchers being most helpful for vulnerable populations, like students with disabilities and economically disadvantaged students. The reality is, private schools create systems that help them maintain the demographics they desire, demographics that do not include either of these populations. In addition to tuition costs out of reach for a majority of families, even with a voucher, private schools are not required to provide transportation, a free and reduced lunch program, and they are exempt from adhering to federal protections guaranteed under IDEA. And as private institutions, they have the right to operate this way, but not with public funds. Thousands of public education advocates have asked this legislature to raise the basic allotment by the minimum $900 the Texas Comptroller has stated is necessary to close the inflation gap and allow schools to pay teachers a living wage. And yet we are here again fighting to just keep public funds in our public schools, where unlike private institutions, accountability and financial transparency are required to receive state funding. There was a resounding cheer in the public education community when the House passed the Herrero Amendment. We are grateful.
Wrap your testimony up, please.
And we are asking you to hold the line. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question just real quickly. You talked about special needs kids and your own personal situation. How do you respond to those parents like testified earlier today from a private school in my district where that had kids with autism that literally had found just the opposite? That the local school was not providing what they wanted, and they went to a very highly qualified school, and they were being successful, working 2 jobs, and grandparents moving in with them. Is that not worthy of some discussion by this body?
Sure. It's my experience being heavily involved in the special education community that schools like that are very rare. So you are still talking about a very, very small percentage of students who could take advantage of that. And to be perfectly honest, that's really something that should be handled. Like there were several people that came and spoke earlier, I think from Oak Ridge, Oak Ridge something, that the amount of therapy that they are giving at that school almost should be covered by healthcare versus education, because there is a school in Austin that does provide some of the same services. It's supposed to be inclusive, has a lot of therapy, but they bill out to insurance. And so yes, but in my experience, there are very, very few schools that offer those services.
Okay, so the level of services are some of our public schools can't provide that level.
Well, I can't speak to that, and I can't speak to their community. That has not been the case. And I didn't get to finish my testimony, but my son is reading now. He communicates. He is communicating his feelings, his thoughts, all things that he was not able to do when he entered public school. It was the only choice for him, and it was the best choice. So I can't speak to other communities, but for our community and for this area, because I explored it heavily when he went into kindergarten, those choices don't exist.
Okay. Do you think maybe that if there was a pathway there, that those choices would begin to exist? If there was a means for more families to afford that type of care?
No, sir, I don't. If you look at the amount of if you look at the cost of therapies, like if we want to do private therapies, the cost of therapy on top of whatever the gap is you would have to make, there's no voucher that could make up the gap for families that could never afford private schools to begin with. So I don't think that having to pay for private therapy and then make up the gap between what you would get from a voucher and then what the tuition of the school is, I don't know that that would really open up a lot of new opportunities for families.
Okay, well, I know the school personally, and I'm speaking for the parents that have literally been through hell to try to get their kids educated and try to provide opportunities, and I think it's absolutely appropriate, to make certain that these kids have access to that type of education and that type of care, and to somehow suggest that there's just no way. There's absolutely no way that this body could provide a pathway for kids and families that are struggling. I don't know. I just find that to be sort of narrow-minded and just not exploring all the options that we need to do for kids and families that really struggle.
And I'm certainly not downplaying that. And what that school offers sounds wonderful and tremendous. And I commend them for the amount to have 40 therapists on staff. I have never heard of anything like that before. But that's why I'm saying that it's very, very rare for that to happen. And if we could put the money toward our public schools to provide some of those services in public school, I don't know why we wouldn't want to go that route. So I'm certainly not downplaying that, and I'm not downplaying anybody that's had to fight for services for their students. But I'm just saying the small percentage versus what we could put into public schools in order to provide more services for students who receive special education services is worth something.
Okay. So if we have to just miss the mark on a few kids, it's okay if it's good for the whole.
No, sir, that's not what I'm saying.
That's kind of what you're saying.
It's not what I'm saying
Yeah,
at all. And I haven't heard you be quite so argumentative with anyone else's testimony. So I feel like I've hit a mark here because this is a personal testimony for me. These are things that have actually happened. And I think sometimes when we hear from private schools that, they are inclusive and we have 80% of our schools have a special education are for special education services. Well, that's somewhat manipulating the data when you say 80% of schools. That could be one student in each of those schools. That's not saying 80% of our students receive services. So the reality is, and this is my reality, this is the reality of a lot of parents that I've talked to because I have served heavily in my district with the special education community, that the option for special education students, those options just don't exist. And I'm not saying we should miss the mark for a few students. I think that those things could be done from the state, from a funding level, to not necessarily through education, but through healthcare to help provide services for students who aren't getting that in their schools. Or we look at funneling more money into private schools so that our special education students don't feel like they have to go elsewhere. I don't want to miss the mark on anyone. I'm just saying that those options are very few and far between.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your testimony, but I also think, we heard from parents that had just the opposite experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that their experience is as valid as the experience that you've had. And I just have always been, for 10 years, longer than that, I've served on a local school board, been very, very concerned about the level of special education services. Lots of reasons why, caps and all that stuff we can talk about, but in the end, you have to solve the problem. And for some of these kids, it just can't wait.
Yes, sir, but the state created the problem with the 8.5% cap.
Yeah. Well, maybe we're trying to solve the problem tonight.
So we created the problem, but we're going to solve it by giving public funds to private institutions. That doesn't make sense.
Okay. Well, actually, you're going to funnel it through parents, and you're going to funnel that. I just feel like that on special needs, especially, that's just important to recognize that there are parents that aren't satisfied with the services that their kids receive.
Sure.
And they found a pathway, and we can't discount that. These are people I know very well from my community. These are not troublemakers and
mine are also people I know very well from my community. Two things can be true at the same time.
That's my point.
Two things can be true at the same time, but you just heard someone talk about the fiscal note for this. That's a lot of money to funnel toward private institutions that have no accountability whatsoever. What does the accountability look like for those special education students? When do we get reports on where that money goes and how they're using those services in the private institutions, and do we see progress measures for that? Because we do in public school. Mm-hmm.
And you can walk into that school any day, and you can see the progress measures on the face of those kids. Okay, so the parents' satisfaction is anecdotal, and bureaucratic testing is the law.
If we're talking
is that what we're talking about?
If we're talking about efficacy and scientifically driven data, then yes, that's it. An opinion is anecdotal. But if we're setting progress measures
Okay.
that are data that we can follow, that's scientifically driven.
Okay. Well, I think many parents in Central Texas, where I live, that are seeking some additional services for their kids in special needs and special education areas would disagree with that.
Okay.
That's not anecdotal of them, but I appreciate your testimony.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. Members, any more questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.